Hi, and welcome to the Dorm Room Costumer. Today we're going to be starting on making the petticoat for the Robe à l'anglaise. Not quite sure if I pronounced that correctly, but we're just going to go with it. First things first is we're going to start working on the back panel. I'm taking a rectangular piece of fabric, and I'm going to start pleating it. The fabric's about the length that I want the petticoat to be. It's a little bit longer, but I want to have room for hemming, and also because I know the false rump is going to take up some of this length. So I'm choosing to use box pleats here, even though they are pretty much historically inaccurate from the research I've done. I haven't really seen them on any petticoats. Mostly the kind of petticoats that have the look I'm going for use gathers, but the fabric I have is this really clunky weave of cotton from an Ikea bedsheet, and it doesn't really gather that prettily. It just looks chunky somehow. So I chose to not do that, and I thought about using knife pleats, but I've always found that they look a little harsh, particularly with this kind of fabric, which tends to take up structure very deeply at the top, but it almost just runs out of it completely at the bottom, and it just looks weird. So instead I'm going with the box pleats just because I like the way it looks and it's going to give the nice gauzy effect that I want. So after I finish pleating, I'm pinning this to my mannequin just to check how it's laying, see if I like how it looks, if the pleats need to be smaller or wider. I ended up going with about 1/2-inch box pleats, and I really like how it's sitting on the mannequin. Also, please excuse whatever's going on with my stays here. I've made them in a huge rush. It's the first thing I ever sewed, so they are not exactly the most pristine looking or well patterned out piece of clothing. So the next thing I'm doing is setting in this pleats. I'm using a machine to do this stitching because I sewed those stays all by hand, and my fingers are still recovering from the blisters and the trauma of sewing 300 boning channels. I'm sewing 2 perpendicular lines across the box pleats about 1 inch apart, and basically, this was a pretty good test because this is a new machine and I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work. I only had one issue with a pin getting stuck in the bobbin case and nearly ripping my finger off when I went to retrieve it. But other than that, I actually really like the machine currently. So then I needed to finish the edges of these box pleats. And so to do this, I started by pinning a scrap of ironed cabbage a little bit below that line where I'd set my box pleats, the second lower line. Then I basically stitched that in place, folded it over, and then on the back part, folded the raw edge in and sewed that in place. This was the start of a terrible decision because I forgot that when you machine stitch, stuff goes all the way through the fabric, all the different layers, and you can't really control that because that's just really how machines work. So I have a really ugly, uneven line across the front of the waistband now and seams. But I just decided to keep on with that because I'm not going to rip out all the seams and start again. That would be a waste of my time, and perfectionism isn't always the best option. Then I did the same thing on the second panel, and I stitched onto the back side, the side closest to the body of those, a piece of linen tape, twill tape actually, about, I think it's 1 inch wide. It's a pretty thick piece, but I find it tends to hold the waistband really smooth. And I've made the same mistake, choosing to use machine sewing. Moving on from that, I decided to basically just sew the 2 panels together since it's not as ghastly when you look at it under decent lighting, and the waistband will not really be shown. So I went in and sewed the two pieces together by pinning them together on the mannequin to make sure that the waistbands were even when they sat over the false rump that I was using for this outfit. So basically at this point, the petticoat is functionally done. It still needs to be hemmed, but I'm waiting to decide on exactly what I'm doing with the overskirt of the dress and how that's going to work to determine the length. Other than that, I've been considering whether or not to add some kind of decoration, but in a lot of extant petticoats I've looked at, they're very plain unless they're quilted petticoats and then they go under clothing, so it just really doesn't seem necessary to me. So I guess that's all for now. Thank you guys for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing if you want to stick around and follow my very new to sewing journey. And thank you guys.